So the Peasant Railgun. Let's talk about this. And if this video seems a little bit odd, it's because I'm walking one of my little ones around in a stroller. So yeah, it'll be a little trippy for some of you. So the Peasant Railgun, and I'm assuming you are familiar with this enough to understand what it means. And if you're not, you'll probably figure it out by the time we're done. So a couple of questions with this. One, what do the rules say? And do the rules support it? Which is a very interesting way of putting the question, I know. And two, how would I handle it, or how would most other DMs, or groups for that matter, tables, handle it? And I think there's some very interesting considerations to be had there. First of all, I think in this case, it's not so much a matter of this being a combo that you have to ask, well, do the rules allow it, or do the rules prohibit it? That's normally what we're asking when we're talking about Raw, right? I think in this case, its biggest problem is the rules don't support it. And here's what I mean by that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't allow this at your table, you shouldn't do this at your table, or that I wouldn't. I'll get to that in a second. But I think the rules don't support it, primarily because, let's say you did get, and I'm going to use a very, very low number. I'm going to say 100 peasants, okay? There is no mechanism, no mechanic in 5th edition to approximate the acceleration of an object, with one exception. And I'm not talking ranged attacks, obviously, okay? Those are just hard-coded, baked in. There's really nothing to modify or to figure out there. But with the one exception of falling damage, which is certainly imperfect for something like this. Now, that said, if I were to have a game where this type of thing were to be attempted, and I were to be inclined to support it, because that is what it actually requires. It doesn't really require the DM to allow it, it requires them to support it. Because they have to figure out, okay, what's the damage, how would this whole thing work? And certainly they would have help from the players in doing that. That's just a foregone conclusion. This would be a massive collaboration between Dungeon Master and players. And so basically, if it were me, I would start with the falling rules and modify from there to kind of figure out how this impacts things. So rules as written, does this work? I don't really think so, but for an unusual reason. Because you're trying to import, very selectively, mind you, import real-world physics, but only to an extent, into the mechanics of the game. It's definitely a metagamey thing to do. And by the way, when I say metagame, that is descriptive. It is not a slur, as so many people use it. It is not meant to be a criticism. It's simply a fact of how you're approaching the question. And so that's what it is. So it's very selectively importing certain real-world mechanics, but ignoring others that are very closely related. Such as limitations on, well, you've got a bunch of people handling an object, right? And handing it to the next person. Okay, that creates quite a bit of friction. That's something that's going to slow it down, even if you did have the kind of acceleration that you're hoping to have from cheesing a mechanic that is meant to approximate something completely different. Hopefully that makes sense. So when it comes to the rules, that's kind of my thought on the matter. That said, I don't think you really need to camp that hard on it. And here's why. First of all, and I'm going to do a video about that. I'm going to actually start a community conversation about types of players here shortly, because I love these conversations. It's been a lot of fun. But when you have, let's say you have a hardcore story gaming table, they're definitely not going to go for this. I don't think most players at that table would go for it. I don't think the DM would go for it at all. It's very cheesing of a metagamey mix-up of mechanics and real-world, like I said, selective real-world physics. So I don't think they're going to go for it at all. They're not going to want to do it. They're not going to want to be involved. Why does that matter? I'll get to that in a second. I think for more of a hardcore dungeon delvey, or, kick down the door and kill the monsters type group, I don't think most of them would go for this either. They wouldn't want to participate in this, and that matters. Certainly not a gritty realism campaign. Oh my word, no. They would try to murder you, I think, if you brought that up. And I don't think there's a whole lot in between. There's one kind of player, one kind of table that I think would go for something like this, and that is more of I think the common term is like a beer and pretzels type game. The whole, let's just, screw around, have fun, and mess with stuff, and make a bunch of jokes. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. That can be a lot of fun. And I think that's the kind of table you're looking at for this. So let me tell you a bit about my philosophy of DMing, or a part of my philosophy of DMing, because I think for people who take this type of approach, I don't think you even have to answer the question of, well, would this work raw? And here's why. My philosophy involves it has to make some amount of sense in the game world. Okay, my NPCs have their own motivations, they have their own desires and drives and secrets and all this kind of stuff. When I run into something that isn't explicitly delineated in the rules as far as how it goes, I try to think of something that kind of makes sense, some kind of internal logic, so that my players can then predict how I'm going to rule on other crazy things. And they know, okay, well, I have to bring up this kind of reasoning or that kind of reasoning. And so that's just how I do it. I'm not saying that's how you have to do it, or it's even a better way of doing it. It's just kind of how I roll. So let's talk about the Peasant Railgun and how it works. How many peasants do you need for this to work? I've seen Peasant Railguns set up requiring like a 2-mile line. I have seen numbers of over 2,000 required. I'm going to say, let's be really, really conservative and say, yeah, maybe you just need 100. Maybe you can make this work with 100. I'm not going to do the math because, again, there's no mechanic for it to determine whether that's actually going to be effective for a Peasant Railgun, but let's say 100 on the conservative side. So, let me get this straight. You and your entire party are going to persuade, cajole, pay, whatever, 100 peasants, villager NPCs, to participate in this. Okay, there's your first hurdle. Are you going to be able to successfully do it? Now, I know some people suggest, well, get a village that owes you. Okay, that could be a great step, and maybe that gives you an advantage in cajoling the people into doing it. Okay, next question. When's the last time you, or anyone you know, has ever managed to wrangle 100 or more people into doing a task that requires coordination and following of instructions? Basic instructions, but instructions. I'll wait. Seriously, and I'm going to bring this up, and I want to be very clear. This is not a complaint at all, and I don't mean this to be offensive to any of the people involved, but I will point out my original Scare the DM challenge video. I was pretty clear on what I was looking for, a combo of abilities, spells, and, class abilities, things like that, and possibly magic items as well. Clear on what I was looking for, and I had a couple of rules that I stated, just because I knew what kind of things I wanted to delve into it and talk about. And the vast majority of the participation in that, which I love, but the vast majority of it were multi-class builds, which isn't what I asked for. Now, again, this isn't a complaint. If people want a platform to, share their favorite multi-class build or whatever, I am perfectly happy to provide that and to look at those. And I kind of feel bad that I haven't had a chance to really delve into all of them the way I want to, but I have a full-time job, and family, and other things that I have to contend with as well. And so I love the fact that people are participating, but you'll notice they went outside of the bounds of some fairly simple parameters pretty fast. And again, that's fine, but it's not fine if you're trying to do a Peasant Railgun. So there would be a lot of roles involved, and this wouldn't be just a casual thing that you would do off the cuff. This would be a thing that your entire party would have to be 100% on board with, and it would be an entire mission, entire mini quest, so to speak. So yeah, there's that. On top of that, there's the question of, wait, this is happening in combat? Oh, okay, sure. Maybe as the first strike, preemptive strike, so to speak, to open up a combat. Maybe. But trying to do all this in combat, yeah. So, Peasant Railgun, not a simple conversation. I kind of doubt it would ever work. That said, I wouldn't DM fiat it. I wouldn't say, no, it doesn't work, I'm not going to allow it. I would probably be more likely if I had a table of players who wanted to try it to say, okay, well, here's what you're going to have to do to actually accomplish it. And oh, by the way, if you do, keep one thing in mind. Anything the players can do, NPCs can do. And I think maybe a demigod or a god in this fantasy world of ours could probably do it a lot better than the party. So just keep that in mind. Whew! Thanks for the input, guys.